Panel, what I'd like to do now, we only have about 5 minutes left. If each of you would take about a minute to give us some key takeaways in the order that you presented. We'd start with Jonathan Cross, then go to Sean Kane, Evan Wilson, and Thad McBride. And in the interest of time, if you'd all just take a minute for a key takeaway from your point of view. Jonathan, please go ahead.
Yes. Well, I think the key takeaway from the history of Iran sanctions is that they've been in a state of flux, and they flowed and ebbed, and they may flow again. So I think if you are doing business in relation to Iran or are considering entering Iran or doing Iran-related business, and that business is currently lawful, of course, the key thing to really, I think, pay attention to is what's your exit strategy. Contractually, how have you accounted for the possibility of the various scenarios we've been discussing playing out? And what rights do you have? What termination rights? What sorts of events would trigger any termination rights that you have? Because I think it's very important to look before leaving in this area.
Thank you, Jonathan. Sean Kane?
Yeah, I think one of the things we maybe have not touched upon today in the presentation is that there's actually another party to this agreement, and that's Iran. And we focused a lot on what might happen on particularly the U.S. side, but obviously the calculus for Iran here and the political calculus domestically is that they would receive some material benefit from the JCPOA. And as this administration's unpredictability carries on, and even more than their unpredictability, their sort of hostility to the agreement becomes more manifest. It obviously has, even if the legal environment has not changed yet, it is a sort of chilling impact on the business environment with respect to Iran, which means that the Iranians are not seeing much material benefit from the deal. So it is not difficult for me to imagine us getting into a cycle of provocation and response, et cetera, but ultimately that this deal becomes politically untenable, not just within the United States, but also within Iran. So for me, the key takeaway is to be mindful of all of the sort of politics surrounding this, and taking that into account, I really would stress, I think all of the other panelists have also said this, that you need to be thinking about exit strategies now, and have those sort of baked in.
Evan Wilson?
Yeah, thanks. Just following on what Sean said, in terms of having the exit strategies, as we've all said, I think things could change quite quickly. The U.S. president has unilateral capacity to exit the deal immediately. There's no guarantee there will be a wind down. As Sean said, and as I discussed briefly, that Iran's interests could change. If there's a regime change in Iran, or if there is some kind of conflict in the Middle East, then the interests change, and they can change quite rapidly. And understanding what those events mean as they happen and giving yourself as much lead time to exit or adjust your course as appropriate is extremely important. So those brave souls doing business in Iran do need to be watching this very, very carefully. And in order to preserve and protect their investments, need to be thinking about exactly their exit strategies and what current events mean and how to interpret them.
And Thad McBride.
I think those are really good points. The only thing I might add is trying to step back for a second and say that while Iran is sort of sanctions on steroids, the issues that it is raising are similar to ones that we see in all the different sanctions regimes. The uncertainty about when sanctions may be imposed or eased or lifted. The possibility that something the United States does is not followed on a multilateral basis. The challenge of getting a multinational organization, which is huge and stretches across lots of different currencies and time zones, to move in sort of a coherent fashion, let alone to be nimble when changes are needed. All of these things, I think, are things that come up across the sanctions landscape, and perhaps the silver lining here is that you can use the Iran situation in your enterprise to take a look at your sanctions programs and policies and think about whether changes are needed, not only to reflect whatever happens with Iran, but just more generally to be responsive to the fact that these things change very, very quickly.